Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for the second episode of Simon's Book Club, where every month we'll be discussing some of the best books on psychology, the science of well-being, neuroscience, and consciousness, and then discussing them here in these videos and in the book club. Today we're talking about A Liberated Mind, how to pivot towards what matters. This is the second part of the video. The first part was hosted on Ichi Kimchi, and in it I talked about how we develop the voice in our head, known as the dictator within, and I talked about it through the lens of relational frame theory. That was the doom and gloom part of the video. If you made it through that, congratulations! You are now at the good feeling part of the video. The keys to salvation are just around the corner. In this video, I'm going to talk about the workings of acceptance commitment therapy, how to use the 6 fundamental pivots to change your relationship with your thoughts, how to get more in touch with what matters to you, and how to live a life where your actions are in line with your values. We ended off the last video with the idea that avoiding our pain doesn't work. We often view our pain as a problem, which is something that we've been taught. And then we apply problem-solving logic to something that doesn't need to be solved. What's worse is that the more we get into the habit of avoiding pain, we coincidentally start falling into behaviors of avoiding pleasure as well, which is just so tragic because we fear the pain that will come after the pleasure has worn off. Or we tell ourselves that we're not worthy of having a happy life. Or many of the other shitty things we say to ourselves that limit us from experiencing the joys of life. Avoiding pain becomes avoiding life. We need to realize that this isn't helping us. In fact, I'm going to go on a little side note here and say that the branding behind mental health is pretty fucked because it's not really mental health that's often talked about, but mental poor health. Google, for example, physical health, and you'll see images of fit and attractive people smiling, flexing, lifting heavy shit, and doing actions that are in line with their values of having good physical health. Google mental health, though, and the images are mostly of heads with broken pieces, squiggly, swirly lines, and frowny faces with people holding their heads or hugging their knees. I mean, look at this shit when I'm trying to find stock footage for mental health. That doesn't seem like good branding at all. Mental health is a good thing, but you couldn't tell from how it's conveyed. Mental health is viewed as a list of syndromes that need to be fixed, rather than a group of processes where we can thrive and flourish, smile and laugh. Our pain is treated as conditions like anxiety and depression, and health is given through medication that's anti-anxiety or anti-depression. Our pain is viewed as a problem to be solved, something to be avoided, rather than a beacon that's indicating something hidden within us that we deeply value and want to strive towards. I personally would like to see a paradigm shift in how we view mental health, something that is more in line with how physical health is shown in a more positive light. So let's try a different approach. According to Hayes,
first, we realize that our avoidance is not paying off, and more of the same will have a perfectly predictable outcome. Second, after we give up on avoidance, we realize that there are alternatives that are 180 degrees in the other direction, and those alternatives do pay off, short-term and long-term.
Part of what we need to do is to understand how we got here, which is through the labyrinth of relational framing, which I covered in the first video. We combine different relational frames of I versus you, here versus there, and now versus then, to create our sense of perspective. And from then on out, our thoughts aren't seen as independent phenomena arising and passing on their own, but we fuse with our thoughts and identify with them. We relate to these thoughts so deeply, so intimately, that we believe we are these thoughts. We think that they are our essence, our true selves. This sense of self then leads us down through a mess of comparisons, rule following, and problem solving, and the suffering that comes from each. And so, if it was relational framing that got us into this mess, then it's relational framing that will get us out of it. Since we can't get rid of these thoughts, and we use relational framing to form these thoughts, let's build some relational frames around the thoughts themselves. It's time to think about our thoughts, to not relate as them, but relate to them. It's time to get meta. It might sound complicated, but it's easier than it sounds. As Hayes puts it,
labeling emotions, noting urges, feeling feelings on purpose, cataloging memories triggered, and sensing what your body is doing. Vital to the ACT exposure approach is the understanding that it is not a way to get rid of emotions. It's a way to create more flexibility in how we respond to them.
This isn't the typical way we respond to our experiences, as we often respond to painful thoughts by trying to avoid them and pray they'll go away, to dope, hope, and cope, which doesn't really seem to work. So let's head in the direction of resolving them by turning towards them, which, according to Hayes,
we helped people see that the experiences they'd been avoiding and the memories of painful experiences they sought to escape were painful and scary to them because they cared. They cared about living a life enriched by love, about being a nurturing person, about pursuing interests they found intrinsically engaging and meaningful, whether or not society was impressed by them.
We hurt because we care. So turning towards our hurts is very important in getting in touch with what we care about. And this is pivotal in understanding psychological flexibility, which is the central tenet of well-being in this book. So I think this is a good point to go over the ideas of psychological flexibility versus inflexibility and what each of these look like. Before I go through this list, though, you could measure your own levels of psychological flexibility by taking the quiz linked in the info box below. Here's a graphic that really shows you what it's like to be open versus closed, flexible versus inflexible. It might be useful to pause the video now and to look at it in more detail, and there's a lot to look at. The more you can relate to what's on the outside, then the more psychological flexibility you have, and you want to be psychologically flexible, adaptive, and responsive. You don't want to be inflexible, rigid, and reactive. So let's test this out. Look at these statements here and see which ones you identify with the most. Rate these on a scale of 1 to 10, with the first suggestion in each pair being a 1 and the last being a 10. You can pick what number you feel represents you the best. So let's start with the first pivot, diffusion. Diffusion helps us create distance from our unhelpful automatic thoughts and perspectives that limit us from living in accordance with our values. Diffusion satisfies our need for coherence and understanding. You remember in Harry Potter when they cast a ridiculous spell? You have the idea that you're afraid of, but then you create distance from it by making it ridiculous. That's a good example of diffusion. Now, looking at the diffusion scale, would you identify more with my thoughts tell me exactly how things are and what I need to do? Or would you identify more with I see each of my thoughts as just one of the many ways to view things. What I do next is up to me. Let's move on to the next pivot, connecting with our authentic self. The connecting with our authentic self pivot helps us focus on what's true for us in all the dimensions of our psychological being rather than ignoring the parts of us we don't like and focusing on what others think we should be doing. It satisfies our need for belonging and connection. This is where we detach from the story we hold of ourselves, where we see it as just a story that we're telling. In doing so, we become aware of the awareness that's behind all of our actions. Like in that little exercise we did in the first video, which is basically the exercise I do the most. I'm aware of my consciousness and of the contents of my consciousness. And once we're out of this smaller mind, separate sense of self, we can connect with a bigger, more interconnected consciousness that we recognize in other people as well. We're not just having an experience with ourselves, we're sharing an experience with others. Fuck, I know that last paragraph sounded really wacky and woo-woo as hell. I know it must, because I remember when I first started getting into meditation and I was hearing discussions from very experienced meditators talking about non-duality and separating from our small mind and connecting with the consciousness behind that. It made no fucking sense to me. I thought it was all bullshit. For real. I struggled with this one for a solid year of meditating. Solid frustration. So if you find it frustrating, I don't blame you, but it's there, eventually. So now, looking at the self as observer scale, would you say that the person I call me is my thoughts and feelings about myself? Or would you identify more with a statement that the person I call me knows what I'm thinking and feeling, but is distinct from and contains these processes? Next on the list is the acceptance pivot, which I've talked about a lot already. It directs us to stop ignoring the messages that our pain is trying to tell us so that we can get in touch with what we really truly care about and find what's meaningful to us. It satisfies our need for feeling. So on the acceptance scale, do you identify more with I constantly struggle with my thoughts and feelings, or more with I willingly accept my thoughts and feelings even when I don't like them? Next on the list is the presence pivot, which is totally my favorite pivot to be. Pivoted? It's pivotal. Basically, it's meditation. Yes, for psychological flexibility, you gotta meditate. Not a lot. Hayes recommends only a few minutes a day. Richie Davidson, arguably the leading scientist on meditation studies who has scanned the brains of some of the most prolific meditators on the planet, suggests you only need 3 minutes a day. 3 minutes just to put everything down, stop what you're doing, stop trying to solve any problems, and just sit. Direct your attention to your breath, or to a body scan, or to whatever works for you. But just give yourself a minute to put down your phone and to pause from the life that you're living. Presence keeps us focused on what's possible right here, right now, so we can mindfully pick different approaches for different situations, while it keeps us out of getting lost in our thoughts. This satisfies our need for orientation. So on this scale, look at how much you pay attention to the present. Would you identify more with I spend much of my time lost in thought about the past or future, my attention is not under my control, or more with I flexibly, voluntarily, and purposefully pay attention to what is happening in the present moment? Okay, so now it's time for me to quibble again. I mentioned in last month's video how I have an issue with scales that add quantities to qualities, and some of these questions I've faced challenges with. For example, I don't think anyone can look at I flexibly, voluntarily, and purposefully pay attention to what is happening in the present moment and give themselves a 10 out of 10 without being oblivious to how often they're getting lost in thought. What is happening in the present moment is that you're very often getting out of the present moment. I remember reading that self-reports on success and mindfulness are higher in novices than they are in experienced meditators because a novice will notice a change from the state of their minds from before and overrate their newfound effectiveness, while experienced meditators will realize that they're still getting lost in tiny thoughts from time to time, and they're aware that they're very often getting lost in these thoughts. Joseph Goldstein, one of the founders of Insight Meditation Society and a big figure in bringing mindfulness to the West, admits to as much. And homeboy lives in meditation retreats for decades. If he's getting lost in thought, so are we. Personally, I know that before I started meditating, I was often lost in a dream for I can't even tell for how long. I wasn't present for a long, long time, but just running on autopilot, fumes, anxiety, and coffee. Now I can pay attention to the present moment a lot more than before, but I still notice when my attention starts to flit and wane. I can just catch myself in those dreams a lot more. The car doesn't leave the driveway very far. No one is always paying attention to the present moment, unless they're a fully awakened Buddha. So good luck on closing your eyes and counting to 100 breaths, to focusing on the minute characteristics of each and every inhale and exhale with your full awareness, without your attention slipping away somewhere for even a millisecond. I call bullshit if you say you could do this, unless you're a very well-seasoned meditator. Our minds are constantly jumping around. So I don't know what to rate myself for this question. I'm not a 10, and I'm not a 1. I haven't added up all the minutes in my waking hours that I'm distracted, so I'm somewhere in between. A 6? A 7? Are there any mega meditators here? What would you rate yourself at? I need a frame of reference here. I can say, though, that I believe I rank a lot higher on the acceptance scale than I once did. I'll give an example. On my flight here to Portugal, I had quite possibly the most intense anxiety attack of my life. I was sitting in my seat with the screen in front of me playing dystopian footage of people in hazmat suits cleaning the interior of the plane. I had just sold my car and all of my possessions except for the clothing, books, and equipment that I could fit into 2 suitcases and carry-ons. I was moving to a new country where I didn't know the language, and I had no connections, no family, and no friends, and no idea about what the fuck I was going to do with my career. If this was a terrible mistake and I was going to end up broke on the streets. I felt such a roaring in my chest. My throat started to close up. My heart was pounding through my ears. I was breathing fast. My eyes were throbbing and my thoughts were spiraling. And it set off a bit of a mindfulness alarm in me, a kind of like security system alert. And I had the thought, am I going to fucking die on this plane? Are they going to have to land this plane early because I'm freaking out? Maybe. Cool. Let's look at this and see what it feels like. And so I tried to feel the swirling in my chest, which started at the bridge of my nose and went down through the middle of my chest, down to my groin, like a narrow, hot crystal burning my insides out. Neat. So I started to ask myself some questions. Was it spinning? Was it growing? Did it throb to any rhythm? Did it have a color? Okay, give it 10 breaths. Did it still feel the same? What thoughts are coming up when I feel it more deeply? Can I make some thoughts that will make it get bigger? What if Fudgy dies on a plane? Oh yeah, that definitely makes it hurt. Okay. I was able to look at it with curiosity. I never felt my anxiety this intensely before. I knew that there wasn't anything I could do or take that would stop it, so I might as well accept it, write it out, and look at it closely with passionate curiosity. And I was able to think, maybe this isn't anxiety. It could just be excitement. I know that stress itself isn't really negative. It's just the internal machinery of your body preparing for high metabolic output, which is super nerdy for me to say, I know. So I know that I was starting a new life here, going on a new adventure, and I'm going to challenge myself in many new ways. And what do you know? I didn't die. I was all right. And that's the last time I take a huge edible before getting on a plane. Okay, so on to the last 2 pivots, values and action, which are a bit more challenging, I found, as I didn't have as much practice with them, nor have I read much about them. So these are fairly new guideposts for me to follow. Let's begin with the values pivot, which redirects our attention from our wants and let us step off this hedonic treadmill. We move away from gratification and the emptiness that comes from accruing material objects. We pivot from just being goal-focused towards the qualities by which we want to live. We're focused on our experiences being ends in themselves rather than a means to an end. We value the journey and not the destination. The path becomes a goal. This satisfies our need for autonomy and purpose. Yeah, I know, that was a lot of phrases from a Hallmark card, and they all sound pretty, but finding our values can be really tough. As Hayes suggests,
one of the greatest sources of psychological distress is losing touch with the values that are truly meaningful to us. I had a client who, when asked about her deepest values, paused for a long time before pushing out the words, "That's the scariest thing I've ever been asked." After another long delay, she added, "I've not thought about that in a long, long time," and began to cry. There is no yearning more important to human beings than to freely pick and pursue our life direction. A clear sense of self-directed meaning provides us with an essentially inexhaustible supply of motivation.
This is where acceptance is a great tool, since our pain usually signals what's important to us, what values we need satisfied. Another great tool that I mentioned in last month's video was a VIA character strengths test. For real, give that test a sincere go. Find the qualities that matter most to you and put your energy towards them. For me, curiosity and love of learning are huge, which is why I'm doing this channel now and why this feels right for me. So on this scale, would you more identify with, I don't know what I want from life, or I am clear about what I choose to value in life? This one could be a bit painful to answer. And finally, the last pivot is the actions pivot, which helps us build habits so that we can continue living in accordance with our values, to cultivate our social support networks, and take care of our bodies. It satisfies our need for competence. It moves us away from being driven, single-minded, perfectionist workaholics, away from our fear of failure, away from success at all costs, if you're not first, you're last kind of mentalities, and towards being more balanced in all areas of life, committed to building a better sense of ethics. Balance is important here. You don't want to be a gym rat that focuses on your physical health but ignores your career and family, nor do you want to be a successful lawyer that's treated their bodies like complete shit. We've been oversaturated with movies and TV shows of competence porn, of people at the top of their fields that suck in other aspects of life, like the Walter Whites and Don Drapers and Tiger Woodses, the succeed at all costs kind of people. That kind of success comes at a cost that we shouldn't pay. Apart from just balance, the actions pivot is also focused on building good habits so that you don't just pick a direction you want and then do whatever feels right, but you set SMART goals, which is something both Hayes and Kaufman talked about in their books. A healthy way to set your goals for them is to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Talking about SMART goals is an entire video in itself, but it's something worth looking up if you're interested. So, for the last question on this test of psychological flexibility, can you more identify with, I don't manage to act on things I care about, or more with, I identify the actions I need to take to put my values into practice, and I see them through? It's a great scale, I think, and a test you could take regularly to make sure that you're living a psychologically flexible life. Hayes suggests you could do it every couple of weeks, or even every week if you like. So, how well did you do? These are my summaries of the 6 pivots based on what I've read here and elsewhere. I highly recommend listening to the Psychology Podcast episode from June 14th, 2017 with Stephen Hayes and Scott Barry Kaufman. Right at the 38-minute mark, Hayes describes all 6 of the pivots so beautifully, poetically, with many different sources. I can't copy it here because it's a long clip and I don't want the YouTube police to catch me. A key message in ACT is that you can't just pick some of these pivots and leave out the rest. This set of psychological flexibility comes as a complete package. You can't just go to the gym and work out on all chest, no legs. While doing some is better than doing none, for best results, you need a balanced diet of them all. And like going to the gym, working on these 6 aspects of psychological flexibility is something you have to do for the rest of your life. It's not like you get fit and then poof, your body will be rock hard forever. You will be impervious to the effects that donuts have on your waistline, and you'll never have to hit the Stairmaster again. It's something you have to practice regularly. It's a lifestyle. It gets easier the more you do it, and it gets harder the less. Kind of like muscle memory, at first you might struggle with your form when you're at the gym, but eventually things get easier. The neurons that fire together wire together. So practice all 6 pivots, and you'll be a lot more psychologically limber and able to handle the inevitable ups and downs in life with more grace and equanimity, and you'll be able to steer yourself closer towards your goals. And sticking with the gym metaphor, it's also super useful and highly recommended to get a trainer when you start off when you're getting used to these exercises so that you don't hurt yourself. The same applies here. Go to bit.ly/findandacttherapist so you could make sure you get the most benefit out of this. This book isn't a substitution for therapy, and we could all use the outside perspective of a trained professional. And that's all I'm going to say about the contents of this book. I loved it. I think Stephen Hayes is brilliant, and he's helped me come to a much better understanding of psychological well-being. His ideas on relational frame theory has helped me both understand where this voice in our head comes from, and it's also helping me understand some of the mechanics in creating this observer in meditation, and especially with me trying to stabilize my non-duality. I know, more woo-woo shit. You're going to get some of that in every episode. And his focus on living in accordance with our values is something that really resonated with me a lot, and it's something that's helping me connect with people around me who are looking for the same way to live. When it comes to practicing the 6 pivots, this is where having a copy of the book will be really helpful for you, as a third part of the book goes over many of the exercises in detail. I'm not going to list them here because this video is already so long. Jesus, how do I keep getting this far gone? I just love talking about books. I love books. One of the exercises I do want to talk about, though, is the values writing exercise. Since the values pivot is such a tough one to practice, I'm starting a monthly values writing group on the Discord. Once a month, I want to get together with whoever wants to join me and write for 10 minutes about a value which we hold dear to ourselves. And then, if we're comfortable enough to do so, to share it with the group. The questions to answer are, what do I care about in this area? What do I want to do in this area that reflects that caring? When in my life has this value been important? What have I seen in my life when others pursue this value or not? What might I do to manifest this value more in my life? When have I violated this value and has that been costly? Going back to the gym metaphor, you'll have more success in the gym if you're going with friends. And likewise, in a bunch of exercises in the book, Hayes mentions how doing them in a social setting can be really profound and help solidify the benefit a lot more. And so I think this would be a good practice for me and for others that want to participate in getting more in line with their values. If you've found some value in this video and found it in any way useful or resonating with you, please consider becoming a patron to support this channel and this project of mine. Head on over to patreon.com/SimonsBookClub. If you do, you'll get access to the Discord server where we discuss the books of the month all month long, along with the other books that we've done in the book club so far. We have a monthly virtual book club meeting and monthly in-person meetings as well. Patrons also get to choose what book we're doing each month, and for January, we're transitioning quite nicely out of Hayes' book and moving into Carol Dweck's Mindset, which I only know about thanks to the recommendations of the patrons. From what I've read about it so far and the graphic that was shared on the Discord server, I think it will totally reinforce what we've learned in this book. And now that we're more limber and psychologically flexible, it's time to buff up. Let's cultivate a growth mindset together. See you next month.